You live inside memory without noticing it. Because memory is not only what you recall, it is what reality uses to decide what you are allowed to perceive. You think you move through time? But time moves through a lattice of stored resonance, and every moment you enter is filtered through what the field already expects from you. This is why the same room can feel different on different days, why the same person can become unrecognizable, why a choice can feel pre-weighted before you speak. Something has already been written into the environment, not as fate, but as pattern. And your nervous system reads that pattern before your mind begins to explain it. Most people assume memory lives inside the brain, but the brain is only a local receiver. It does not own memory, it negotiates with it. The deeper archive is external and internal at once, a structural layer woven through matter, emotion, symbol, and timing, storing not facts but frequencies. When you remember, you are not pulling a file from a shelf. You are re-entering a resonance groove that still exists in the field. And if that groove is strong enough, it shapes your present as if the past is still alive. Because in the lattice it is. You have felt this in the way certain dates return with unexplained weight, in the way certain streets trigger a mood with no clear source, in the way certain songs open a door you did not know was locked. You called it nostalgia, trauma, intuition, chemistry, coincidence. But those are labels for effects. The cause is architectural. Memory is a structural permission system, a set of pathways the field makes available because you once walked them with enough charge to carve them into reality. An objection rises here, because the mind wants clean categories. If memory is in the field, why do people forget? Why do they misremember? Why do two witnesses describe the same event differently? Why does the past change when a new truth is learned? The answer is the first fracture. The lattice does not store a single timeline of facts. It stores interference patterns of meaning. Memory is not a record, it is a living weave. And living weaves bend under pressure, not because they lie, but because they are designed to keep coherence. Your forgetting is not always failure. Sometimes it is containment. Certain memories would not only hurt, they would destabilize the identity you are currently using to function inside this density. So the lattice applies a dampening layer, not as punishment, but as structural safety. It reduces access to what you cannot integrate yet, and it does this by lowering resonance compatibility between you and the stored pattern. You still carry the memory, but you cannot reach it cleanly, because reaching it would collapse the architecture of your current self. This creates the second objection, quieter and more dangerous. If memory is regulated by coherence, then awakening is not about learning, it is about becoming capable. That means the truth you seek is not hidden behind gates, it is hidden behind your own current stability threshold. People do not like this because it removes the fantasy that some external authority is withholding. It implies that you are not blocked, you are not ready, and readiness is not virtue, it is alignment. And alignment is work. So what is the memory lattice in real terms? It is a multi-layer network of resonance nodes that store experience as pattern, and that network exists across your body, your environment, your relationships, and the timing rhythms of your life. A memory node can be a physical object, a location, a smell, a phrase, a color, a face, a specific kind of silence, a particular kind of rejection. You keep calling these triggers, as if they are accidents, but they are anchors. They are access points into stored architectures. This is why healing sometimes fails when it stays psychological. You can talk about the event and still live inside the lattice pattern of it, because the lattice is not primarily narrative, it is frequency. The body holds the frequency. The environment mirrors it. The relationships that match it keep appearing. The timing repeats it. And then you say you are cursed, when what you are actually seeing is a stable resonance circuit, doing what stable circuits do. They loop until disrupted by a stronger coherent signal. There is a reason people repeat relationships, repeat betrayals, repeat scarcity, repeat the same internal argument for decades. The lattice prefers familiarity over freedom because familiarity is predictable, and predictability stabilizes the field. Even pain can be used as a stabilizer. A wounded identity can function like a structural beam. Remove it too quickly and the whole inner house collapses, not because the wound was good, but because it was load-bearing. Now the third objection arrives, the one almost nobody admits. If the lattice stores pattern and the pattern organizes life, then the self is not only choosing, it is being chosen by its own stored architecture. People hear that and panic because it feels like loss of agency, but agency was never the ability to act randomly. Agency is the ability to override the default pattern with a higher-order coherence. Freedom is not the absence of conditioning. Freedom is the presence of a stronger tone than the conditioning. This is why your strongest breakthroughs do not feel like effort. They feel like a snap into a new alignment, and then the world reorganizes around you. Suddenly, new people appear. Old cravings lose authority. Old fears weaken. The same street feels different. The same room breathes. You interpret that as mood or luck. But it is the lattice rerouting because your signal changed. The system is responsive. It does not worship your intentions. It responds to your coherence. The memory lattice also explains why some manifestations do not land. The desire is real. The visualization is vivid. The rituals are consistent. And still the outcome fails to stabilize. Because the lattice is not impressed by wanting. Wanting can be a signal, but it can also be noise. If your deeper stored pattern is incompatible with the new reality, the field will not hold it. Not because it hates you, but because the old architecture still has structural priority. You are trying to hang a new door on a wall that still belongs to an older blueprint. So the work is not to force the new door. The work is to find the load-bearing memory node that keeps the old wall in place. You find it by watching what repeats when you are tired, what returns when you stop performing, what intensifies right before progress, what appears in your dreams when you decide to change. The lattice reveals itself through timing. It reveals itself through resistance. The moment you move toward expansion, the stored architecture that depends on contraction will rise to defend itself, and it will call that defense realism. Realism is often the voice of the lattice. It sounds like caution, like maturity, like logic. But ask what it protects. If it protects your safety while still allowing growth, it is wisdom. If it protects your identity while sacrificing possibility, it is a memory beam refusing to be removed. The lattice does not speak in mystical language. It speaks in convincing reasons that keep you inside the known. There is another layer, more subtle. The lattice is not only personal, it is collective. Families share nodes, communities share nodes, nations share nodes, entire eras share nodes. This is why trauma can outlive the people who experienced it directly. The resonance stays in the field, encoded into norms, encoded into jokes, encoded into what is not spoken at dinner tables, encoded into what children sense without being told. The child inherits a lattice before the child has a story. Then the child grows into the story that matches the inherited architecture. This is where people argue again. They will say, "That sounds like determinism. That sounds unfair. That sounds like blaming the victim." It is neither. It is mechanics. The lattice explains the transmission, not to shame anyone, but to reveal the location of intervention. If a wound is collective, private work alone will feel like swimming against a current. And if a pattern is inherited, self-hatred will only reinforce it, because shame is itself a strong stabilizer in the lattice. The exit is not blame. The exit is coherence. Coherence does not mean calm. Calm can be faked. Coherence is when your inner signal stops splitting into contradicting commands. One part wants love, another expects abandonment. One part wants wealth, another trusts suffering. One part wants visibility, another believes visibility is danger. That split creates interference, and the lattice, being an architecture of pattern, will select the outcome that matches the dominant stored groove, not the most beautiful conscious wish. This is why the most important memory work is not recollection. It is integration. Integration is when you can touch a node without being hijacked by it, when you can feel the charge without turning it into identity, when you can remember without reenacting, when you can see the pattern without worshiping it. The lattice begins to loosen, not when you uncover every detail, but when the resonance charge stops needing to defend itself through repetition. Yet even that can sound too clean, too final, too motivational, and the system will reject it if it feels like a closing statement. Because you already know people who say they healed and still carry the same eyes, the same hunger, the same defensive posture, only now they call it spiritual strength. The lattice can disguise itself as improvement. A refined prison is still a prison. A more poetic explanation of the same loop is still the loop. So the question is not, have you healed? The question is, did the field reroute? Did your life stop selecting the same scenes? Did your body stop bracing for the old ending? Did your timing stop repeating the same emotional weather? If the answer is no, the lattice is still in control, and it is using your language to keep the architecture intact. There is a way to see the lattice in real time. Watch what you assume will happen next in any interaction. That assumption is a predictive memory, and it broadcasts into the field as instruction. The other person may feel it as pressure. The room may respond as tension. The timing may distort. Your body may tighten. This is not metaphysical fantasy. It is the nervous system reading and writing simultaneously. You are always editing the present with stored expectation, and the lattice is always rewarding expectation that matches existing grooves. This is why the lattice loves certainty early. Certainty reduces complexity. Certainty compresses possibility into one channel, and that makes stabilization easier. But that early certainty is also what keeps you small. When you insist you know what a moment means before it unfolds, you collapse the branch structure of time into the most familiar path. You call that being realistic. The lattice calls it compliance, and here the deeper layer presses in. The lattice is not an enemy. It is the field trying to maintain continuity of self across time. Without it, identity would fragment with every emotional wave. Memory creates the illusion of a single you. It stitches days together. It turns a sequence of moments into a narrative. It gives your name a consistent vibration. It keeps your skills available. It keeps your language stable. It is the reason you can function. So you cannot simply destroy it. You must upgrade it. Upgrading the lattice means you must introduce a new organizing tone that the field prefers over the old one. This is why discipline matters. Not moral discipline. Resonance discipline. The ability to hold a signal even when the old grooves demand collapse. The ability to stay present inside discomfort without rushing into conclusion. The ability to let the next scene form without forcing it into the old story. This is not passive. It is pressure held without discharge. Because the lattice is built on discharge. Every time an old memory charge rises and you react, you discharge it into behavior, and the behavior feeds the groove, and the groove strengthens. And the lattice says, yes, that is still the self. Every time you pause and do not discharge, you create a gap the lattice cannot immediately fill with the old pattern. That gap is dangerous to the old architecture. That gap is where new coherence begins. But do not mistake the gap for peace. The gap often feels like emptiness, like uncertainty, like being unprotected. That is why people run back to old habits, old relationships, old beliefs. They would rather be hurt inside a known structure than be undefined inside a new one. The lattice offers identity. The unknown offers expansion. Expansion requires a tolerance for temporary incoherence, while a higher coherence forms. And now you can feel what this actually is. The memory lattice is the hidden blueprint behind your repeated life. It is the scaffolding that keeps your reality consistent, even when you claim you want change. It is the structure that translates past charge into present limitation. It is the system that makes time feel linear because it keeps returning you to the same nodes. And the moment you begin to see it, the lattice will test you. Because seeing it is not an idea, it is an interference. So this is the edge you stand on. You can keep treating memory as private history, or you can recognize it as environmental architecture. You can keep chasing new outcomes while carrying the same resonance code. Or you can begin rewriting the code by refusing to stabilize early, refusing to conclude too soon, refusing to obey the first interpretation. The lattice will push for the old ending, not because it is cruel, but because it is trained, and training is stronger than desire until coherence surpasses it. If you want proof, watch what happens after this video ends. Notice what your mind tries to label immediately. Notice what it tries to dismiss. Notice what it tries to turn into a comforting takeaway. That is the lattice trying to close the file. Do not close it yet. Let it stay open. Let the pressure remain, because the moment you keep it open, you are already doing what most people never do. You are no longer remembering the past. You are beginning to remember the architecture that makes the past repeat. You do not exit the memory lattice by understanding it. Understanding only gives the mind a map, and the lattice is not navigated by maps. It is navigated by pressure, timing, and sustained presence inside moments that refuse to resolve the way they used to. The lattice does not release you because you saw it. It releases you when it can no longer predict you. Prediction is its primary stabilizing function. When your responses become less legible to the stored pattern, the architecture begins to loosen, not all at once, but node by node, sequence by sequence, reaction by reaction. Most people believe change happens when a new decision is made. In reality, change happens when an old expectation fails repeatedly without discharge. The lattice expects reaction. It expects completion. It expects you to close the loop with behavior, justification, or story. When you do not, the loop destabilizes. The field hesitates. Something that relied on inevitability suddenly encounters uncertainty. That hesitation is not weakness. It is the opening through which new structure forms. This is why moments of real transformation feel strangely quiet at first. There is no dramatic release, no victory surge, no final insight. Instead, there is a sensation of suspension, as if reality is waiting to see what you will do next. The old pattern has stepped back, but the new one has not yet claimed authority. This interval is uncomfortable because identity thrives on continuity. You feel undefined. You feel less solid. You feel less certain. And the lattice interprets this as risk. Risk is not danger to the body. Risk is danger to the pattern. The lattice is designed to preserve coherence across time, and coherence depends on repetition. When you interrupt repetition without replacing it with a stronger rhythm, the system experiences instability. It will attempt to reassert control through subtle pressure. Old thoughts will resurface with convincing urgency. Old desires will return with new disguises. Old fears will frame themselves as common sense. This is not regression, it is resistance. Resistance does not mean you are failing. Resistance means you have reached a structural node that matters. The lattice does not resist trivial shifts. It resists changes that would alter the distribution of energy across your life. It resists changes that would require it to reorganize relationships, habits, timing patterns, and emotional defaults. When resistance appears, you are no longer working at the surface. You are touching load-bearing architecture. At this stage, the most common mistake is interpretation. The mind wants to explain the resistance, to categorize it, to solve it. But explanation often becomes a substitute for presence. You label the sensation and believe you have handled it. The lattice welcomes this, because labeling often restores predictability. The moment you say this is fear, this is trauma, this is doubt, you collapse the field into a known category. The old groove resumes authority, now dressed in insight. The work here is subtler. You stay with the sensation without naming it into completion. You allow the discomfort to exist without rushing it toward meaning. This is not suppression. Suppression pushes energy down. Presence means you let the energy move without directing it into the old channel. You feel the impulse to react and do not obey it. You feel the impulse to conclude and do not grant it closure. You let the moment remain unresolved long enough for the lattice to lose its script. Time behaves differently here. When a pattern is active, time feels fast and repetitive. You know how this scene ends. You have been here before. When a pattern is interrupted, time stretches. Seconds feel heavier. Choices feel less obvious. The future does not rush toward you with the same momentum. This is not stagnation. This is temporal plasticity. The lattice relies on speed. Slowing down is one of the simplest ways to destabilize it. This is why silence is powerful, not as an aesthetic, but as a structural disruption. Silence removes the cues the lattice uses to predict behavior. When you do not immediately respond, when you do not fill the space with explanation, when you do not rush to perform coherence, a field cannot complete the loop. The other person feels it. The environment shifts. The moment changes weight. Silence is not absence. It is withheld completion. The lattice also operates through emotional gravity. Certain emotions pull events toward them. Shame pulls concealment. Fear pulls justification. Desire pulls attachment. Guilt pulls repair. These emotions are not wrong. They are organizing forces. But when they dominate, they define the architecture of response. The lattice learns which emotional frequency reliably produces which behavior, and it uses that relationship to maintain stability. You think you feel and then act. The lattice sees a stimulus-response chain. To loosen this chain, you do not eliminate emotion. You allow emotion without obeying its demand. You let fear exist without proving safety. You let guilt exist without repairing. You let desire exist without grasping. This feels unnatural because it contradicts conditioning. But conditioning is precisely what you are interrupting. Emotion wants discharge. Presence delays discharge. Delay weakens the groove. Over time, the lattice begins to adjust. It reallocates energy. It stops investing as heavily in the old nodes because the return is no longer reliable. Patterns that once activated automatically now hesitate. You notice space where there used to be compulsion. This is not because the pattern is gone. It is because its authority is eroding. Authority in the lattice is statistical. It belongs to what has worked most often. This reveals something critical. You do not need to destroy the memory lattice. You only need to make the old pattern less efficient than the emerging one. The field always selects the most stable solution with the least energetic cost. If reacting costs more than staying present, the system will choose presence. If repeating costs more than adapting, the system will adapt. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. A single dramatic breakthrough does less than 1,000 small non-reactions. There is also a relational dimension. The lattice is reinforced through other people. They respond to the version of you they have learned. They expect certain tones, certain defenses, certain roles. When you shift, they feel it as dissonance. Some will unconsciously attempt to pull you back into the old pattern, not out of malice, but because your change destabilizes their own predictive map. Their nervous system relied on your consistency. Now it has to adjust. This is where many people retreat. They interpret relational friction as evidence that the change is wrong. But friction is often confirmation that something real is happening. If your shift required no adjustment from anyone else, it would not be structural. It would be cosmetic. The lattice spans multiple bodies. When you change your signal, the shared field reorganizes. Some connections strengthen, some weaken, some dissolve. This is architecture responding to new load distributions. The danger here is superiority. When you see the lattice, it is tempting to see others as trapped or unconscious. That belief itself becomes a new pattern, one that isolates and hardens. The lattice does not care what story you tell about others. It cares what frequency you emit. If your awareness produces separation, it will reorganize your life around isolation. If your awareness produces humility and steadiness, it will reorganize around coherence. Humility does not mean shrinking. It means recognizing that you are still inside a system, even as you learn to work with it. You are not above the lattice. You are participating in its evolution. Every time you refuse to stabilize prematurely, every time you allow a moment to breathe instead of closing it, you introduce a new option into the field. That option becomes available not only to you, but to others who share resonance with you. This is how collective patterns shift. Not through mass agreement, but through enough individuals holding a new coherence long enough for it to register as viable. The lattice updates when a pattern proves itself over time. This is slow. It is unglamorous. It does not trend, but it works. History changes not when ideas appear, but when behaviors become statistically dominant. The final illusion to dissolve is the idea of completion. The lattice never fully disappears. It evolves. New patterns form. New memories stabilize. New grooves are carved. Freedom is not a static state. It is an ongoing capacity to remain responsive rather than automatic. You will always have architecture. The question is whether you inhabit it consciously or unconsciously. You will know the shift is real not because everything feels light, but because repetition loses its grip. You stop asking why this keeps happening. You stop bracing for the familiar ending. You notice yourself choosing differently without forcing it. The body softens in situations that once triggered armor. Time feels less claustrophobic. The future feels less scripted. These are structural signs, not emotional ones. And still, the lattice will test you. It will present refined versions of old patterns. It will ask if you are sure. It will offer comfort in exchange for predictability. This is not sabotage. It is verification. The system needs to know whether the new coherence holds under pressure. If it does, the update integrates. If it does not, the old pattern resumes until another attempt begins. So do not rush to declare arrival. Do not announce mastery. Do not close the narrative. Stay inside the work without dramatizing it. Let the lattice continue to reveal itself through daily moments, through pauses, through choices that feel smaller than they are. The real rewrite happens quietly, in places no one applauds, in seconds where you choose not to be who the pattern expects. You are not here to erase your past. You are here to stop living inside its automatic architecture. The memory lattice was never a prison. It was a scaffold, and scaffolds are not removed by force. They are removed when the structure can stand without them. Remain present long enough, and the field will recognize you as something new. If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.